Welcome to iMagazine's Best Practice video series, where we interview winners from our iMagazine Awards from around the world. For this video, we are joined by Hendrik Rosenthal, Director, Group Sustainability at CLP. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So, Hendrik, your company won the prize for Best ESG Materiality Reporting for a large cap at the iMagazine Awards Greater China 2021. First of all, many congratulations.
Very pleased. Thank you. Quite honored to win this award. Thank you.
Fantastic. And to start the conversation off, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your company?
Sure. Yeah. I basically run the group sustainability function for CLP Holdings. We're a listed entity in Hong Kong. We have businesses that span across the region in the electric utility space, and my role in particular is responsible for the disclosure, ESG disclosure in particular, sustainability reporting, and also working with the queries from the investor side in particular, the rating agencies, and how we are performing on that spectrum. But increasingly, what's also been added over the last few years has been a more a communications and marketing element to this function. So we do want to be quite clear in terms of sharing some of the achievements and some of the different outreach programs we have, and some of the different real operational changes we're making to the business, and bringing that back to stakeholders and other interested parties through a more communicative channel, and not so factual as perhaps we might do for investors. So that we've been building that out for a number of years now, and hopefully some of that has come through to you as well. But what's really come through in particular now is that the group sustainability function is also taking a much more strategic role within the business. So we have specialists and technical support that really helps us understand some of the emerging challenges that we're dealing with as part of the business, and also how we should perhaps lay out some longer term plans in terms of managing these challenges, in terms of, in particular for us, that being climate change, that being a big piece. So it's sort of three elements: disclosure, communications, and strategic planning that come with the group sustainability function that I'm overseeing.
Fantastic. No, that's really helpful to understand. Thank you, Hendrik. And so I wanted to ask you, first of all, about the sustainability report that won the award with us. Now, that was your 2020 report. So that probably feels like a long time ago, because I know since then you've released another report, but sort of casting your mind back as well as you can to that 2020 report, which was released in 2021, I believe. So that would, what were the sort of main aims of that report? Were there any sort of topics you particularly wanted to dive into, or tell us about the challenges of that report? What was that experience like?
Sure. Yeah. No. I'll try to sort of remember the challenges we had back in 2019, I guess, and early 2020 when we wrote the report, and we publish annually in March, which is also at the same time as our financial report comes out. And so the 2020 report that we're referring to now was taking an approach in terms of really trying to hone in on the key material topics for CLP and for CLP's business, and how we manage those and how we respond to those challenges, and what sort of performance we had over the year. So there's a year review section that's part of each one of the material topics, as we call them. And then we have an outlook section in terms of what do we see coming, and how do we plan for the future. And we really divided it up into four key areas. And as mentioned already, climate change really being front and center for us, given the nature of our business and the carbon intensity that's traditionally associated with electric utilities. But then we also put a big focus on technology, and how technology is evolving to help us in our own operations in terms of efficiency and deploying new solutions to make the sort of more traditional assets that we operate to help optimize them. But beyond that, to really deploy new and emerging technologies in the electric utility space to create and grow new businesses, and where we see new opportunities for us as not just being a provider of electricity to our customers, but also really being a solution provider in terms of enabling efficiency of the consumption of those electrons that we send across the grid. So that's what we had described or tried to describe it in that sort of section, and it's a key change for us in terms of evolving as a utility, and as we call it, we wanting to become the utility of the future. The third element, and that relates to a very pertinent topic still, is around cyber, and that relates to cyber resilience, being resilient as an organization in terms of, obviously, we're connected with the Internet of Things to cyberspace, and we want to make sure whatever does come in is only good for us and is not disruptive. And as I'm sure many of you are aware, there is very large challenges around that globally. And given the importance of our operations and the commitments we make to our customers, to the markets where we operate, to the cities that we literally keep running, it's very, very important for us to make sure that we have the right systems in place to enable resilience. But at the same time, it's also about managing customer information. Obviously, not obviously, but we do have over 5 million customer accounts here in Hong Kong, as well as in Australia with our business there, and it's really very fundamental for us that none of that information is compromised in the sphere of cyber, and it's only used and protected appropriately. So those are the sort of three really big pieces, but there's a fourth one that comes with that, and we had built a narrative around that, and this is really an issue that is, I think, quite important, not just for us as a business, but given the changing nature and the sort of changing expectations of business. And we have or are putting quite a bit of importance in terms of workforce and how we transform our workforce. What sort of people do we need? And fundamentally, given the changing nature of our business, we need different skills. And how do we enable our own people to grow within that changing environment? And how do we enable real change to come through the organization based on the right skills and the right enabling environment for our people as well, in terms of simple workforce like policies? And having worked remotely now for over 2 years, and having published, actually this time, the 21 report, if I may, is the third report that we published online, with the team literally working from home for the majority of that reporting cycle. And that obviously means we can do this. Well, let's perhaps be a little bit more flexible in terms of how we manage our day-to-day working if we are not under lockdown and under sort of constraints related to COVID, for instance. So all that needs to evolve and change. And some of these elements that I've just described is what we sort of manifested in the sustainability report, and hopefully brought closer to our readers and our stakeholders and our investors.
Fantastic. Thank you, Hendrik. Well, that's really useful to get an idea, of the main sort of focus areas of that report and what putting that report was like. And you have a great memory, because, as you say, it's going back a little while now, and other projects have come since then. But you just mentioned the 2021 report, which is the more recent one, the sustainability report. And I'd love to ask you about that now, to sort of bring the story up to date. So I was just mainly keen to ask what may have changed between the two reports. To what extent have you sort of moved your reporting on, in terms of your understanding of materiality issues? Like, what sort of changed between the two reports?
So fundamentally, in terms of what's material and from a CLP's perspective, nothing really changed from that angle. It's how we dissect the nature of the topics, and how do we then feed that back to stakeholders, and that's really what we what we then deployed was what is called a double materiality approach, and that's what's fundamentally different from the 2020 report to the newest iteration that we just published a couple of months ago now, in terms of really identifying what's relevant from these big issues, these material topics, what's shaping the world and what's shaping our business, what's relevant from an enterprise value perspective. And that's really what fundamentally investors would like to usually know. And then what's relevant in terms of where do we have impacts and where do we as a business have the biggest impacts, and how do we manage those impacts, which may or may not be financially or fundamentally relevant from an enterprise value perspective. So we had similar topics as the four I just described, but we look at them in different lights and from a different angle. And what we've done in particular, what's different for the annual report, which is usually the one that's targeted for the investor side, is where we are describing materiality and our process and our thinking, and we manifest some of that in terms of the transition, for example, our transition from a decarbonization perspective. How do we transition our business? How do we plan on meeting a net zero commitment, for instance? What have we done this year, and what are we going to do? So that in itself is a big piece that's now described in the annual report. And then speaking more strategically about these technology pieces that I referred to earlier, how and where do we want to deploy these? What sort of opportunities do we have as a business? And the resilience angle as well coming through there that I mentioned, in particular around climate, around cyber, but to some extent is then also related again to climate change. And then fundamentally, how is that all underpinned with a workforce? And if you don't have the right people in place, there is risk to enterprise value. So all that's now in the annual report, structured in a way that it wasn't previously. But at the same time, we still have the sustainability report, where we then talk about these topics, or in particular about climate change and environmental impacts. Those are outlined in the sustainability report, and impacts in terms of resilience as well. And then really about our people, our communities, and our customers, and how do we impact them, and what sort of programs and initiatives do we have in place to cater to that. So it was really about sort of separating out the thought process for each of these issues, and then trying to write that up in each of the reports, to then hopefully cater to, on the sustainability report, to a broader audience that's not necessarily fundamentally interested in enterprise value, but really in terms of much more interested in what is CLP doing as a business, and where does CLP have impact, and how is that being positively or not yet, managed well enough, or on the flip side, where do we have what is called financially material issues, and how are those then navigated to demonstrate to the investors that there is inherent systems in place to continue to operate successfully with these big changing forces that are influencing us.
Fantastic. Thank you, Hendrik. No, that's really interesting to hear. First of all, just a bit about your new report, and then also how you're thinking about sort of presenting the information, sort of separating it up. What's the role of the annual report? What's the role of the sustainability report? And then how they sort of work together. And I know like a lot of other companies will be going through sort of similar processes, have similar questions. You talked about moving to this double materiality focus, which is we're seeing sort of around the world, driven by on the corporate side, but also by regulators in some cases as well. So maybe just to finish off, I wondered, is there one sort of piece of advice that you would give to either sort of investor relations professionals or sustainability teams sort of that want to improve their sustainability or ESG reporting?
Yeah, no, it's an evolving field. I think we need to recognize that, and it's sort of a matter of staying on top of the evolving reporting standards for one thing, But fundamentally, it's really about understanding as well, how do we create value through this process of disclosure to the company? What do we learn from this? And how can this help us be better prepared, rather, to a changing operating environment? And I think that's where the thinking, that should be the starting point for any organization. We don't just do reports for the sake of ticking a few boxes and meeting some sort of standard and meeting a requirement because the stock exchange asks for it or some other regulator. It should be helpful for an helpful annual exercise of reflection. What have we done? How far have we gotten? Where do we need to go? And these frameworks that are in place, and I would say in particular what's now being debated and discussed as we speak and consulted upon by the ISSB, I think that's really where we need to have more focus, and that's where we are then really elevating sustainability to a level of decision making that our senior management and our board can work with, and hopefully through that process make more informed decisions that are not just good for the bottom line, but not to be cliche, but also good for the planet.
No, absolutely. And I think that's a great point, that reporting is, it's just it's very important, but it's just the kind of the output, and it's just a part of a much bigger process, that the sort of what's changing overall within the company. But I think that's a really good thing to bear in mind. But Hendrik, I think that's a great place to leave the conversation here. So thank you so much for talking to us today. Everyone who's watching should go out and check out both of your sustainability reports for the last couple of years and see how they've evolved. So thank you so much for talking to us today. It's been great to speak to you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for having us. And, we're learning as well. We are learning, and any feedback is most welcome. If there's any sort of additional thoughts or ideas anyone has, we're happy to chat. Appreciate that. And thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Well, we'll make sure that people have your email address, and then they can get in touch if they have any comments. But thank you again. Great to speak to you.